Hello and welcome to the Met Office. I'm broadcasting live here at the Met Office headquarters in Exeter. My name's Aidan McGivern. I'm a meteorologist and weather presenter at the Met Office. And you join me live. It is 9 a.m. on the first day of meteorological autumn. No sign of any stormy weather at the moment, but rest assured, when storms do turn up, we're going to be naming them. For the 7th year in a row, we're going to be giving really impactful weather, really serious wind and rain names, basically just to raise public awareness and help to save lives, help to save property and businesses. So every year we come up with a new list, and that list runs from the 1st of September through to the 31st of August the following year. And we have this year's list, which is going to be revealed live here right now. If you stay with me, I'm going to be revealing that list. It's not quite the A to Z of storms because some letters don't have names, unfortunately. This is two reasons. Keep things consistent with other storm naming centres. For example, the National Hurricane Centre don't use Q, U, X, Y and Z either, and so to keep things consistent across the North Atlantic and so on. And also, can you imagine trying to come up with a new X name every year? You know, once you've come up with Xavier and Xena, you might be struggling a little bit. So it's the A to W, a few letters missing, but we'll be revealing them right here. And to make things even more exciting, I'm going to be revealing these names one at a time in reverse alphabetical order. So, without further ado, this year's W name is Willemien. That's Willemien. It's a Dutch name, so it's a name that has been submitted by KNMI in the Netherlands, because we don't do this on our own. The Met Office works in collaboration with Met Erin, the Irish Met Service, and KNMI, the Dutch Met Service, and together we come up with this list of storm names. So you'll see some Irish names, you'll see some Dutch names, and you'll see some names that have been submitted by you in the UK. And Willemien is the W name, and the V name is Virgil. That's Virgil. That's what we have for this year's V name. Why do we name storms? I've already touched on it. It's all about raising awareness. It's about spreading the news as far and as wide, reaching as many people as possible about serious weather when it is predicted. So when we get wind and rain that could cause impacts that cause a risk to people's lives, to people's properties and businesses, that's when we name these storms. And in the age of social media, it helps to clarify the message. It helps to get these storms trending. It helps to make them famous, and that's what we want to do. We want to make these storms as famous as possible, because by making these things famous, then people sit up, pay attention, and hopefully will save people's lives as a result. Next up, T. This year's storm name is... Before we come on to T, stat for you, 91% of people within the amber warning area of Storm Kira, when that happened in February 2020, 91% were aware of the Storm Kira warning. That's a survey of the general public who were in the amber warning area. And 70% of those people took action as a result. So it just goes to show that by naming these storms, you massively increase people's awareness. People change their actions. They might not go on that cliff top walk, or they might not swim in the sea as a result, or they might bring their trampolines inside and store them safely in the garage. So that is why we name these storms. Tineke, that is the letter T for this year. I think that's another Dutch name. S for Sean. That's this year's storm name for is Sean. Now, when do storms get named? That's a good question. When these storms get named is when there is the potential to cause serious impacts from the wind or the rain or the snow. Normally, it's when a storm has the potential to have an amber or red warning. So we're either about to issue an amber warning, or we think that this storm has enough impacts that, in a few days' time, we'll probably issue an amber warning for wind or for rain or for snow and so on. And we work with partners such as the Environment Agency to advise us on risk of flooding from storms like these, and SEPA in Scotland, National Natural Resources Wales as well. So we work with partners to advise us on the kinds of impacts that storms can bring, and it's when those storms are likely to lead to an amber or red warning. It's when those impacts are deemed serious enough that we will name the storms, and we'll give them a name like Sean or Tinaka or Virgil. A few questions coming in. Thank you for sending some questions in. Steph Horspool on YouTube. I hope there are no storms approaching us soon. There aren't, as far as I can see, Steph. The weather is very quiet at the moment. We've almost got the opposite of stormy weather. We've got a really big area of high pressure sitting close to the UK. Doesn't always mean it will be sunny, as a lot of people have found out in the last few days. We can often have these cloudy highs where a layer of low cloud gets trapped underneath an area of high pressure and simply doesn't budge. And that's what a lot of us have experienced recently. Helen Taylor. Hurricane Helen sounds good. Thanks for your suggestion, Helen. Well, we'll see if H is for Helen in a moment or so. And Paul on Facebook. We've got to have a storm, Paul. Stay tuned, Paul. Stay tuned. Kit on YouTube. What wind speed denotes a storm? Do you still use the Beaufort scale? Yeah, we do use the Beaufort scale, particularly when it comes to shipping forecasts. We'll use the Beaufort scale, but we also reference the Beaufort scale in some of our public-facing broadcasts. So we'll talk about gales, or we'll talk about storm force winds and so on. We don't have an actual wind speed threshold that determines a storm. We use what's called an impacts-based warning system, and so we will look at how the wind will impact us, and that will vary for different times of year and for different parts of the country. So, for example, 60-mile-an-hour wind gust would cause much more impacts in London in June than the same wind speed in Shetland in December, because of course Shetland is typically windier than London, and the trees and so on are used to those kinds of winds. And in the summer, you're likely to get much more impacts from wind speeds like that, with temporary structures up, people expecting more clement weather, and the trees in full leaf and so on. So we use an impacts-based warnings system. So we look at the impacts that each of these storms are likely to bring, and when these impacts are judged high enough, that's when these storms get named. Thank you for your questions. Moving on to R for Ruby, and a few people have been sending in, as well as submitting their suggestions. They've been sending in their reason for their suggestion, and here's a good one from Louise. My cat Ruby comes in and acts like a storm, wrecking my house, especially with my kids. That's from Louise. So at the Met Office, we asked people to send in their suggestions a few months ago. More than 10,000 suggestions were sent in for storm names, believe it or not. A lot of them were based around people that people knew or their pets, and we had some really great reasons coming in. So that's one for Ruby. And that's how we chose the storm names this year. That's how the Met Office picked names. It was from your suggestions. So that's Ruby. And now we're skipping Q, moving on to P. Paul had a question a moment ago. We got to have a storm, Paul. Almost, Paul. Almost. It's not quite spelt the same as your name, but Paul there for P. That's how you pronounce it, Paul. That's this year's P name. How do people submit their names in the future? You can submit your names by sending your suggestions to nameourstorms@metoffice.gov.uk, and it might be thrown into the mix for next year's list of storm names. See a few more questions. If we get to W, we will have been in real trouble, Hilary says. Yeah, that's right, Hilary. The furthest in the alphabet we've got so far, in the 7 or the 6 years that we've done it so far, is Storm K. That was Storm Katie in the first year that we did it, 2015 to 2016. So we would have a seriously stormy season if we got to W. Jason asks, why are storm names shared between Ireland and the UK? Good question, Jason. It's simply because storms that affect Ireland very often affect the UK and vice versa. And so it makes sense to collaborate with Ireland and the Netherlands. We all share a similar storm track. Helps to share insights into forecasting as well. It helps to improve our messaging. And so it makes sense to share these names. And it's a lot of fun to have different nationalities mixed in with the storm naming list as well, in my opinion. Steve Wells, in the future, will the UK ever get a strong Category 5 storm? Steve, I guess you're referring to the National Hurricane Centre and the hurricane scale. I'd say it's very unlikely to get a hurricane that is a Category 5 hitting the UK. For starters, we don't technically get hurricanes because we're too far north. Hurricanes are tropical storms and we're well away from the tropics. But we do get storms that were once hurricanes. So we can get these hurricanes forming in the Gulf and moving across the Atlantic and transitioning to more typical areas of low pressure that we see during the autumn and winter often in the UK. And these can contain remnants of hurricanes. And if they contain enough remnants of the hurricane, they will keep the hurricane name. And if they are likely to bring impacts to the UK, so that we would name it, then we would give it the name of the hurricane. So if Hurricane Ralph affected the US and then went up through the North Atlantic and turned into an area of low pressure, but contained enough of that tropical moisture and energy, then that it would impact us seriously, then we would then call it Storm Ralph. If it didn't bring those impacts and it was just a wet and windy spell, or even if it just didn't affect the UK at all, then we'd call it ex-Hurricane Ralph. So I hope that clears that up. But the kind of wind speeds you get with Category 5 hurricanes, hopefully we won't ever experience those because they are seriously, seriously strong. Has there ever been a Storm Sandra? Off the top of my head, Sandra, no, I don't know if Sandra's ever been in a storm names list, but we've only ever made it to K, so we've never actually had a storm beginning with S so far. Right, let's move on. And next up is O, and Olwyn is my mum, and she can never get anything with her name on when she was little, so I would like to name a storm after her. That's a very nice suggestion, Bex. And she could have a storm named after her if we make it to O. Olwyn is the name. Now, next up, N. I quite like this one because it is Nassim, and I like it because it's an Arabic name which apparently means breeze, so it's entirely appropriate. If we make it to Storm Nassim, it means breeze. Next up is M, and here we go, Maeve. Irish name, Maeve for the M letter. A few more questions have come in. It's an off-topic question, but can the jet stream move in the opposite direction, east to west? That's from Joseph. Yes, short answer to that, Joseph. It can move in the opposite direction. I've seen that happen. But small segments of the jet stream can move in the opposite direction, east to west, when you get a highly amplified jet stream. So when it's really up and down, it can go full circle and it can start moving either in a complete circle around an area of low pressure or around an area of high pressure if these get cut off. Or it can move in a very amplified, like snake-like pattern around the globe, and parts of it can move east to west. But in general, on average, the flow of the jet stream does move west to east in the northern hemisphere, or at least in the polar front jet, that's what we call it, in the northern hemisphere. Kit asks a good question about the storm of October 1987. He's asked, when did the naming of storms begin? I remember the Great Storm of 1987, but don't remember it having a name. And that's a really good point, because that was part of the problem. Of course, our weather forecasting has improved a huge amount since October of 1987. That really wasn't a very good weather forecast at all. But we've come a long way. This is more than 30 years ago, so our weather forecasting has improved a lot, but our communication has improved a lot as well. It was after October 1987 that we introduced the National Severe Weather Warning Service. So that's when, to issue these warnings when impactful weather is likely. That was introduced after October 1987, but since then, the naming of storms was introduced in 2015 as an extra way to help inform people, help warn people of severe weather. And really, there's no point in having really good forecasting if we're not going to tell people about it, if we're not going to warn people about the impacts from that weather. So that's what it's all about. It's about keeping people up to date, keeping people informed and warned about serious weather that could cause some very harmful impacts. Next up, the letter L for Logan. My grandson Logan runs through the house like a tornado. That's from Stella. A few people submitted suggestions for Logan. It's a great Scottish name. And yeah, that's a really good reason to name a storm after your grandson. Thank you, Stella. So that is Logan. Next up, we've got the letter K. And another good reason for the letter K, because it's my own name. Why not? It's short to read out, and I love nature and constantly weather watch, and selfishly, I would just be so thrilled. That's from Kim. Thank you, Kim. Right, next, the letter J. And another easy one to read out. Jack is the letter J. Couple more questions are coming in. So some people obviously have suggested family members, or they've suggested pets. But Bev Gibson on YouTube said, can anyone remember Storm Eileen? I named my cat after this storm. So people are now naming their pets after storms. I'd be interested to know if anyone's named their child after a storm. That would be a funny one. Storm Eileen kind of reminds me of when my nan was reading out her name in a phonetic alphabet kind of way, and she said A for Eileen, which was quite funny. A few more questions. Who remembers storms in 2013 to 2014? One was strong enough to rip our doors out. That's from Tom Wynn. Yeah, that was a really stormy season, Tom. And it was after that season, really, that the Met Office and Met Erin came up with this idea to name the storms to increase awareness of these storms that we can get in the autumn and winter and at other times of year. Daniel Meakin asks, what will happen if we have a tornado? Good question, Daniel, because, of course, tornadoes are much, much smaller features compared to the great big areas of low pressure that we get off the Atlantic that we name in our Name Our Storms thing. And tornadoes, although they can cause serious damage, and we've seen destructive tornadoes in the UK. We do get a lot of tornadoes in the UK each year for the size of the UK. We wouldn't typically name a tornado because they are really difficult to predict precisely with enough advance warning, and it would just. I can't really see a situation in which we would be able to name a tornado in the same way that we can name these areas of low pressure that come in off the Atlantic. Lawrence James says, I was working at the supercomputer at the Met Office in Bracknell in 1987. Remember that day very well. Wow. That must have been a crazy time to work at the Met Office, Lawrence. And Vicky Burton, my daughter is named Hayley after hailstones, if that counts. I'm a meteorology mad mum. That's brilliant, Vicky. Send in your comments about anyone that's been named after the weather. That's really. I wanted to name my daughters after clouds, but I wasn't allowed. Let's see. Letter I, Imani. That's Imani for I. We're not the only ones that name storms. We have different storm naming centres around Europe. So we're in collaboration with the UK, Ireland and the Netherlands. And then you've also got Denmark, Norway and Sweden who name storms together. That's the kind of Northern Europe group. And then towards the southwest, you've got Spain, Portugal, France, Belgium, Luxembourg. They all name storms as well. And if they name a storm that then is expected to impact the UK or Ireland, then it would keep that name, even if it causes serious impacts to us as well. So often you find that these names suddenly appear out of the blue. They're French names or they're Spanish names because they've been named by those countries, and then they go on to cause trouble in our part of the world as well. Next up, H. Herman. That's the letter H. That's a suggestion from KNMI in the Netherlands, and that's Herman. And followed closely by G for Gladys. And here's another suggestion. A strong and sometimes tempestuous woman in my family, bright, dynamic and exciting. That's from Sally. Thank you, Sally. I'm sure Gladys will be thrilled to have a storm named after. I wonder if any of these people who now have storms named after them were asked their permission, or whether they will it will be a complete surprise to them when these storms turn up. Next is the letter F and Franklin. Another good reason here. My 4-year-old son is like a hurricane himself, leaving a trail of destruction behind him usually. I'm seeing a theme here, children leaving destruction, and they, as a result, get storms named after them. Something else has come in Glasgow around 1967. There was a storm or hurricane called Low Q. Why did it have this name? Oh, I vaguely remember this, but I just can't quite put my finger on it. Do have a vague memory of that, Scott, but yeah, sorry, I just don't quite know why it was called Low Q. I know that, actually, thinking back, it's probably because on these synoptic charts, where you get all the highs and lows mapped around the Northern Hemisphere or whatever, they normally had letters associated with them. So back in the day, you'd have these charts appearing in newspapers with letters for the different areas of low pressure, so you could track them. You could call. So I think that's why that storm was called Low Q. It was just given that letter on a map. Scott Kelly says A should be Alexander because it's of historical importance and it's my son's name. We did actually have a storm Alex last year, but it wasn't named by the Met Office. It was France. France had Alex as the first name of their storm names list. It impacted France. Then it came on to bring some wind and rain to the UK, and so we kept that name when we referred to it as Storm Alex in the forecasts. I remember that clearly because it bumped Aidan into second list that year on the storm naming side. E for Eunice. E for Eunice, another great name there. Of course, we haven't been the only ones naming storms throughout history. Lots of different countries have named storms. Back in the Second World War, the US Air Force named typhoons in the Pacific, in the Mariana Islands, typhoons that were impacting the Mariana Islands. They were named after the wives and girlfriends, apparently, of people who were in the US Air Force. And then in the 1950s, the US developed this kind of naming system more widely and started naming hurricanes. And at the same time, Germany started naming every single high pressure and low pressure, or at least the University of Berlin started naming them. And they now charge people, so you can pay to have your name featured on an area of low pressure or high pressure. But this is a completely free service. D for Dudley. We already knew that Dudley was going to make an appearance in this list because we ran a competition, or at least a vote, on social media last week. Which D name? We had something like 8 D names, and you guys, 12,000 people voted, and Dudley came out top. and so we knew that was going to make an appearance. My fiance's surname is Dudley. We'd find it funny to have a storm named after us in remembrance of us getting married. Well, congratulations, Rose. And next up, Corey. That is the C name this year. It's a bit like bingo. Next year we should have bingo cards. 2 fat ladies, and it's Barra. That's B, and we're getting up to the top of the list now. So remember, when a storm is impactful enough that it's going to cause serious damage or risk to life, then we name these storms and we go from A through to W. And when the first impactful storm appears, it might be next week, it might be in a month, or it might be in 3 months. It will be called Arwen. Arwen, good Welsh name that. Apparently means noble maiden or muse, and it was popularised by Lord of the Rings, but it's still a name used in society today. So that's it. That's Arwen, Barra, Corey, Dudley, Eunice, Franklin, Gladys, Herman, Emily, Jack, Kim, Logan, Maeve, Nassim, Olwyn, Paul, Ruby, Sean, Tinica, Virgil, Wilhelmine. Those are this year's storm names. So that is the 2021 to 2022 list of storm names. And when we get the impactful weather, the whole point of it is to make these storms famous, to make as many people aware as possible so that they can change their plans, they can take action, they can protect themselves, their property, their businesses. And that's what it's all about. That's why we're here. That's why the Met Office communicates forecasts and warnings and names storms in collaboration with Met Erin and KNMI in the Netherlands. So yeah, stay up to date with the Met Office, obviously, and we'll keep you up to date with when these storms are likely to be named. Sometimes they get named preemptively by the media. Always come to the Met Office first to check if it's true that a particular storm is coming. And we will let you know. We'll be the first ones to let you know on social media when these storms are to be named. Thank you for watching. That's all for me from now. And yeah, bye-bye.